The room had been lit only by wavering lamplight, throwing long shadows across the plastered walls. On a low bed, the maid twisted in pain, her breaths shallow and ragged. Those nearby heard only muffled groans and the soft clink of ceramic as a bowl was set aside. The broth she had swallowed looked ordinary, no different from the kitchen's daily fare. Yet whispers had already spread that her portion had been prepared apart from everyone else's. The noblewoman, later known to history as Giulia Tofana, watched with an unsettling composure. The pattern unfolding before her followed a now familiar sequence: cramping, retching, then a deceptive lull. As the maid's symptoms briefly eased, onlookers murmured that it might only be a passing illness. But the mistress's gaze remained fixed, clinical, almost measuring every twitch and spasm. She noted how the victim still spoke, still stood, while a slow, invisible damage advanced within. On the dressing table, separated from rosaries and trinkets, stood a small vial disguised as a cosmetic bottle. Its clear liquid contained a carefully balanced blend of arsenic and possibly lead or belladonna, formulations later attributed to the deadly solution called aqua tofana. Over the following days, the maid grew weaker, her organs failing in silence. This was no kitchen mistake. It was a calculated trial, refining a poison that soon would be feared across much of Europe. The story moved to 17th century Rome and Naples, where palaces stood only streets away from cramped, airless tenements. In these crowded quarters, entire families shared single rooms, and disease, hunger, and debt pressed on daily life. Over everything loomed strict Catholic morality, enforced from pulpit and confessional. Priests, preachers, and neighbors alike watched conduct closely, turning private households into places of scrutiny as much as shelter. For married women in the Papal States, the law offered almost no escape from a brutal home. Annulments were rare legal curiosities, granted only under narrow conditions. Divorce, as understood today, simply did not exist, and formal separations marked women with social disgrace and economic ruin. Meanwhile, court records showed that adultery, even suspected, and disobedience could draw harsh punishments, reinforcing a system that kept many wives trapped with violent husbands. Within this tightening moral and legal net, whispers began to circulate in the poorer quarters of Rome and Naples. Certain women, it was said, could provide a different kind of remedy. Names traveled softly from market stalls to church steps, from laundry yards to alleys. At night, coins changed hands on shadowed stairwells, and small vials passed under shawls as a clandestine market in tailored death quietly took shape. The investigation now shifted to the elusive woman at the center of the legend, Giulia Tofana. Surviving documents suggested that she had been born in Palermo, though even this detail remained uncertain. References in legal records and local chronicles connected her to Tofania d'Adamo, executed there in 1633 for providing poison to women accused of murdering their husbands. From this grim episode, historians reconstructed the familial and criminal context in which Giulia first appeared. After Tofania d'Adamo's execution, traces of the network did not vanish. Instead, fragmentary sources indicated that Giulia Tofana inherited both the clandestine clientele and the technical knowledge of discreet poisoning. Within a few years, she seemed to have relocated from Sicily to Rome, where opportunities and anonymity were greater. There, she inserted herself into the bustling urban fabric, far from the Palermo courts that had condemned her presumed relative and exposed their trade. In Rome, Giulia Tofana carefully crafted a respectable public identity. Contemporary accounts and later summaries described her as a purveyor of cosmetics, perfumes, and devotional oils, a role that granted intimate access to the private spaces of women. Behind this facade, authorities later claimed, she continued the covert sale of poison. Yet the record remained sparse. A handful of trial mentions and scattered notes contrasted sharply with the sensational tales that 18th and 19th century writers built around her name. No sealed vial of aqua tofana survived for modern laboratories, so its composition emerged from scattered testimonies and toxicological speculation. 17th and 18th century writers consistently described a clear, almost invisible liquid slipped into wine, broth, or water without altering taste or smell. Physicians who suspected poisoning later pointed to arsenic trioxide as its principal ingredient, sometimes augmented with lead salts and perhaps antimony. all common materials in early modern pharmacies. Apothecary manuals of the period revealed how accessible these substances had been. Arsenic appeared in inventories as rat poison and as a component of external remedies. Lead compounds featured in cosmetics and medicinal plasters. A customer needed no elaborate connections to acquire them, only a plausible story and a few coins. Contemporary reports suggested that aqua tofana originated in such ordinary shops, disguised among jars of ointments, syrups, and devotional waters. Later reconstructions, based on those sources, imagined the preparation in chilling detail. White arsenic was ground to a fine powder, then simmered in water or weak wine, sometimes with herbs or lead compounds, before being slowly filtered into a transparent solution. Administered in tiny doses over days, it inflamed the gastrointestinal tract. Victims weakened through vomiting, diarrhea, and dehydration, while physicians often recorded the decline as a lingering fever or a wasting disease, not a crime. The story returned to Julia's clandestine workshop, where aqua tofana took its final deceptive form. The liquid, clear and seemingly harmless, was poured into small glass vials and bottles that resembled devotional or cosmetic items. Labels invoked piety and innocence, with names such as Mana of St. Nicholas of Bari or comparable titles. On a dressing table or beside a home altar, the poison blended seamlessly into the religious and domestic landscape. According to later accounts, clients reportedly received precise instructions. They were told to add only a few drops to wine, soup, or broth, never enough to spark sudden, dramatic illness. The dose was meant to slip beneath notice, repeated over several days or weeks. Symptoms resembled a slow, natural decline: stomach pains, vomiting, exhaustion. To neighbors and physicians, it looked like an ordinary, if unfortunate, gastric disease progressing in a predictable way. Some letters and testimonies suggested a darker refinement. To avoid miscalculation, certain noblewomen and wealthy bourgeois women allegedly turned to their own households for experiments. Servants received tiny, concealed doses first, their weakness, pallor, and recovery carefully observed. Once the response seemed measured, the same regimen, extended and intensified, was directed at a husband. In records, his death appeared as a lingering illness while the true test had already been carried out below stairs. As the trials unfolded, the story of Giulia Tofana ceased to be a handful of whispered tragedies and became, in the eyes of observers, a vast subterranean trade. Italian chroniclers such as Alessandro Adamolo later described investigations that seemed to uncover an organized network, stretching from Rome to Naples and beyond. Confessions, denunciations, and rumors intertwined, producing claims that Tofana's wares had claimed lives in the hundreds over 2 turbulent decades. Some 19th-century writers repeated the assertion that more than 600 men had died from Tofana's poison between the 1630s and 1650s, a figure that circulated widely in popular histories. Modern scholars, however, treated this total with caution. They noted the fragmentary state of 17th-century judicial records and the tendency of sensational trials to inflate numbers. Surviving documents suggested a smaller, though still disturbing tally of confirmed or strongly suspected cases. In Roman and Neapolitan archives, specific proceedings hinted at the network's contours. Widows appeared before magistrates, their pasts re-examined after interrogations elsewhere mentioned unnamed sellers of cosmetics and waters. Husbands had died of agonizing stomach pains, dismissed at the time as fevers or gastric complaints. Years later, similarities emerged. The same slow wasting, physicians misled by familiar symptoms, and quiet payments exchanged among women with few lawful means to escape violent homes. In later accounts, the story of Giulia Tofana's downfall began in an ordinary Roman dining room, sometime in the late 1640s or early 1650s. A wife had already slipped aqua tofana into her husband's soup, following whispered instructions passed through friends and neighbors. Yet, as the steaming bowl reached the table, fear overtook her. Watching him lift the spoon, she suddenly broke, begging him not to eat, her panic shattering the illusion of normality. The husband, startled and suspicious, put down the spoon and demanded an explanation. Her contradictory answers deepened his alarm. In a city already alert to rumors of secret remedies and marital unrest, he turned to the authorities. Under interrogation, the wife's resolve crumbled. Faced with threats of torture and damnation, she described a colorless, tasteless liquid said to bring slow, natural-seeming death, and admitted she had bought it from a woman known in certain circles of Rome. That confession gave papal investigators their first clear lead. Officials traced the chain of introductions, questioning neighbors, servants, and widows who seemed unexpectedly fortunate. Whispers of a hidden market in poisons began to circulate through Rome's parishes and marketplaces. Each arrest produced new names, as fear encouraged confessions and denunciations. Gradually, investigators converged on a single figure, Giulia Tofana, rumored provider of the deadly potion that had quietly reshaped the city's map of marriages and inheritances. When the first accusation surfaced in Rome, Giulia Tofana reportedly fled to a church, hoping sanctuary would shield her from arrest. Later writers disagreed over its identity, some naming San Pietro, others a different parish, but they agreed she trusted the ancient protection of holy ground. For a brief time, the stone walls and silent chapels appeared to place her beyond secular reach, even as rumors of secret poisoning spread through the city. Yet, within the papal states, sanctuary depended on papal will. As public fear grew, fueled by stories of wives quietly murdering husbands with tasteless liquids, authorities moved. Papal officials, operating under the authority of Pope Innocent X, reportedly disregarded the church refuge and removed Giulia Tofana by force. She and a circle of suspected accomplices entered the machinery of Roman justice, secret cells, interrogations, and the calibrated brutality of judicial torture. Contemporary and near-contemporary accounts described a sensational trial that unfolded under Innocent X. Chroniclers claimed Giulia admitted to supplying poison over many years, perhaps decades, to women desperate to escape unwanted marriages. Legal records from Rome later referred to multiple executions linked to her case. However, many original trial documents were lost or destroyed, leaving historians to reconstruct the proceedings from fragmentary archives, secondary summaries, and later retellings that blurred fact with legend. The morning of Giulia Tofana's execution unfolded like a carefully staged sermon. In Rome, around the late 1650s, crowds gathered as officials led her and several accomplices to the scaffold. Chroniclers described how she remained composed even when the sentence of death was pronounced. Reportedly strangled before her body was displayed in a public square, she became an example arranged as much for spectacle as for justice. Authorities framed the execution as a lesson about morality and social order. Preachers and officials condemned what they called unnatural wives who poisoned their husbands, claiming such women overturned the God-given hierarchy of marriage. The display of Tofana's body, alongside those of her alleged associates, was meant to frighten potential imitators. Observers noted the tension between her calm demeanor and the furious rhetoric echoing through the crowd. In the years that followed, her case echoed in courtrooms and sick rooms across the Italian states. Physicians in the Papal States grew more cautious, hesitating before declaring slow gastric deaths to be natural. Legal records showed inquisitors and secular judges paying closer attention to patterns of inheritance and repeated bereavements. Widows whose relatives died conveniently now drew particular suspicion as Giulia Tofana's legend reshaped how Europe imagined the poisoned household. By the 18th century, the name of Giulia Tofana had lingered like a whisper in courts and alleyways. Criminal pamphlets and sensational broadsides across Europe spoke of a miraculous liquid, invisible in wine or soup, that erased unwanted husbands without a trace. The details shifted from city to city, but the motif stayed constant. A composed woman at the household table, holding a power that law and religion denied her in any other form. 19th-century writers eagerly recycled this dark inheritance. Alexandre Dumas retold the tale with theatrical flourishes, while German and English chroniclers embellished it in penny papers and crime collections. In their hands, Aqua Tofana became an all-purpose emblem of wicked femininity, the noblewoman or pious widow who, before poisoning a husband, supposedly tested her vial on a servant. Each retelling nudged the story further from the fragile court records that had first mentioned Giulia's name. Modern historians and toxicologists later sifted through these layers of rumor. They confirmed that slow, arsenic-based poisoning in the home remained a real danger into the 19th century. Yet they found little firm proof for the most lurid servant-testing scenes. Still, the image endured. A suffering body at the edge of a kitchen, sacrificed to a clear, tasteless liquid. In that image, chemistry, gender, and power had briefly aligned, turning a simple meal into an unseen battlefield.